Faith Church, I hope you are well today. If you've been reading along through Genesis with us, really encourage you to do so. Yesterday was one of the most, some would say difficult, I actually think beautiful stories in the entire scripture. The story of Abraham's taking Isaac to be sacrificed. On the surface, it's a tragic, terrible story, but once you begin to reflect on what's actually happening there, to the depth of Abraham's commitment to God, to be willing to give anything for God's sake, and yet God's commitment to Abraham, I believe this whole story points forward to Christ, that the lamb caught in the thicket points us forward to the fact that God does not ask us to sacrifice ourselves in this way, but gives himself as a sacrifice for the sake of his people. Beautiful story. People often overlook today's reading, Genesis 23. I know I have. Really today, maybe the first time I really reflected deeply on what's happening here. In the beginning of the chapter, Sarah, Abraham's wife, dies. She's 127 years old. And he grieves her and mourns her loss for a time, and then seeks to go to lay her to rest. Actually, reminded me of several families in our own church who have lost somebody this last several months. And as we as a church grieve these brothers and sisters, we also long for that day when we can lay them to rest. Abraham wants to bury his wife there where he is in the land of Canaan, the land that God has promised them. But he owns no property there yet, and so he goes to seek out the Hittites, who are the residents there, to ask them if he might be able to purchase a piece of property. And they offer it to him for free. So you can have any property you want. Just you're one of us, and we would like to do that. The problem was Abraham needs a permanent piece of property, because in the ancient world it was understood that it was so important to be laid to rest with your forefathers. Generations would be buried in the same place. Oftentimes in the Old Testament, you'll see that so-and-so dies and he was went to rest with his fathers, literally to be buried in that same place. Still sometimes happens today where families are buried together, but it's incredibly important in those days. And Abraham does not want to risk this generational piece of land for him and his ancestors on a promise. He needs it formal. So he says, no, I want to buy the piece of property. And I have one in mind. Ephron has this piece of property I'd love to have. And Ephron's sitting there, and he hears this, and he speaks up, and he says, seemingly generously, no, you can have the piece of property. But Ephron knows already that Abraham will not take it in that way. So I think he's just playing games. He wants to make himself appear generous. Abraham again refuses, says, no, I want to buy it from you. And so he has this great line. Ephron says, well, what's 400 shekels of silver between you and me? 400 shekels of silver is actually quite a bit between you and me. It works out to about $125,000, an incredible amount. Don't have any idea that Ephron here is being generous. He sees an opportunity to make some money, and he does. But Abraham pays it. He's willing to do it. Because again, he wants this piece of property. He's invested, wants to. It's a generational thing for him. And I thought there's the old. I don't know if it actually ever happened, but the idea that when people would go to settle a new land, colonize new land, that they would burn the ships as a way to say, we're not going back, we're staying. And in a way, this is what Abraham is doing here, that God has promised him this land of Canaan. He's just one family, one son. And yet God says, I will give you this land, and you'll be so many descendants, it'll be as many as the stars in the sky. And Abraham, in this purchase of this land, makes this act of faith to say, I will stay here. This is where you've called me. I will be here. My sons, my grandsons, my grandchildren, all my descendants, we will be buried in this place. In fact, Abraham's buried here as well. So is his son Isaac and Rebekah and Leah and Jacob. He is making this statement, and it made me think. Where has God asked me to sink roots, to make an investment for the long term? Certainly in places like marriage, God has asked me and you to make that long-term investment, children and friendships, maybe in a neighborhood or community or ministry. I have a friend named Steve who lives in South Carolina. He served the same church since, I think, the late 80s. He's still there. And I've been to visit him and seen the fruit of that investment of sinking roots in a place. And I began to think to myself, where is God calling me to say, Jeff, I want you here for the long term, to be in this relationship, in this community, in this ministry, whatever it might be. Because sometimes the really rich fruit only comes after we stay for a long time and resist the temptations for novelty and something new and moving to this neighborhood and whatever it might be. And I would just pose you the same question: where in your life right now might God be asking you to burn the ships, to really make an investment in this person, this community, this work, this neighborhood, whatever it might be, and to ask God for the strength to do so. Also hope you'll read Psalm 32 today. It's the Psalm of the day, just a beautiful prayer of confession. I could talk a lot about what that prayer is about, but don't just read it. I encourage you to pray yourself. So I hope these words have been an encouragement to you. I hope that wherever you are today, you are encouraged, and I pray that you will sense the blessing of the peace and grace of Christ and the love of God, who is our Father, and the fellowship, the presence of the Spirit. Blessings to you.